without my glasses, so we're really getting that. For those of you who don't know Linda Abbott, she's fantastic. I've known her for a number of years. She graduated with a Bachelor of Music Education from Northern Kentucky University. Hey, guys in the lobby, we're doing an intro. Thank you. It's danceable. After moving to Los Angeles, she music directed 40 musicals as well as taught choir and musical theater in North Hollywood. Linda currently teaches in the Lakota School District and has worked on over 100 musicals in various roles, including music director, vocal director, accompanist, and director. Take it away, Linda.
Thank you.
Yay!
So nice to see. I know a lot of you, maybe some new faces, and I feel like what I have to say might not be that important. You guys have all done musical. You guys have all done theater a lot. But maybe it'll be something that can help you when a lot of you are judging, because I know sometimes it's hard to come up with things. Sometimes if you're not a musician. And so I brought a handout, old school. Sorry, I couldn't email it to you if you want. And it's on this pretty goldenrod paper. I still had it, my pleasure. So feel free to ask questions anytime. You don't have to wait till the end or anything, because sometimes I might think I say something, but it's just in my head and I forgot to tell you that, and you might be confused. So feel free. So I've done lots of different jobs in musicals, and most of the music directing. I put on this paper, you can see the side that says music director and vocal director, rehearsal. I separated them out because a lot of times people don't know that they're different jobs. They'll say music director and they just assume that that's the person who talks the vocals or whatever. But there really are different categories. Music director, you can see there, says hires the band, leads the band, performances. And so they're mainly, that job is mainly the musicians and leading the band. Vocal director, of course, teaching the vocals, auditioning the singers. It's real important for them to be at the audition to see if the actors can sing the right range for the show. Help with technique, song interpretation, diction. Work closely with the director and music director to make sure the performances are in line with the overall vision. Now, and then rehearsal accompanist. Sometimes one person does all of these jobs. Sometimes you might be the vocal director and you play your rehearsal, so you're the accompanist. And sometimes you're also the person who leads the band. But they are 3 different jobs. And I love the theaters that actually separate these out, and they'll put it like a line item in the budget for each one. Because as a music director, when you come in, you can see, okay, I have $250 I can hire an accompanist to play these many rehearsals so I can watch and not have to, play and not be able to, sing. Especially if the band, when it gets to tech week, and sometimes they have to put the band in weird places like behind the stage. And, as a vocal director, you can't see it anymore. So if you can hire a pianist for 1 or 2 times so you can listen to the cast with what they're doing now that you're actually running. When you hear places like this, you might not have space for an orchestra. I did a show here once. We had 2 pianos, and it was perfect. It was fine. It was a Rodgers and Hammerstein review. Sometimes you might be back in a hole, though. We've been in whole different levels of a building, and you just have a monitor. So so many different scenarios. So it's good as a music director to talk to your producers before you go in. What's it going to be like? Where's the band going to be? Do we have space for a band? It's a big question. Sometimes people think they have to have all the instruments that are listed in the score. They sent me 15 books, so I have to have 15 musicians. Well, you only have room for 5. You can't. So you have to pick and choose which 5 by listening to the score, looking at the score. Which 5 do I really need? What can I do with? There's some music directors that have to have every instrument, and when you get there, you realize that the band's way too loud for the space. One of my first shows at Footlighters. Maybe I shouldn't say the name of the theaters. It was us. It wasn't Footlighters. But it called for 2 or 3 trumpets, and so we got them. And if you know the space where up top where it used to be the organ loft and it pushes the sound up, it's supposed to, but all you could hear was trumpets. And you couldn't hear the singers, and I'm like, it was like my very first show there. And so we're like, they're like, can you get them to play softer? I'm like, okay. So I'm like, you guys, can you please play softer? It's really loud. They didn't. You know?
Shocking.
And then I said, how about you play one act and you play the other act? Didn't work. So we had to let them go. And I'm like, I felt terrible. Actually, I got the drummer to do it for me. So, but we paid them some money. So you never know what situation you're going to get to. You have to adapt. I try to go with the smallest amount of musicians that's going to sound great. It's also because how much money does your theater have? You know, some pay, some don't. I have the fortune of training a lot of friends to play. They don't get the glory. It's not like they're playing a concert on a stage. You have to get people that are willing to be the accompaniment and they're not the focus. You gotta play soft because we want to hear the singers. That's the most important thing. So a lot of times, it's finding people. That's probably one of the hardest things. Finding musicians who can play a 3-week run, and are willing not to be the focus. You know, sometimes they get overlooked. They might get a producer coming one time and saying, "Oh, hi, you guys are good." That's it. You know, and they don't get the glory like everybody else. So we really appreciate it when a director or an actor actually comes and talks to you and says, you know, thank you. So just be wary of that if you're directing a show. And I know that has nothing to do with judging, but I'll go back here. Get off my high horse. Okay. So music director in charge of the band, vocal director in charge, of course, of the singers. And I wrote specific things that you can read later. And the rehearsal accompanist. And the rehearsal accompanist you can't just say, oh, this person plays piano. Accompanying's a lot different than solo piano. I'm good at accompanying. I'm not a great soloist piano. I mean, I can play it. I learned since 8 years old. Beethoven, Mozart, I loved it. But theater is what I loved. If anybody ever teaches instruments, let me just tell you, my piano teacher is the best person in the world because she would let me bring in something that I liked, as well as learning Mozart and Beethoven. So it kept me so involved. I would practice like 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day. And my family actually used to put the piano in my bedroom because they couldn't watch TV anymore. But anyhow, I was like the only 10-year-old bringing Oklahoma Score to work on. When I was 12, I remember doing every song from Jesus Christ Superstar along with my regular piano stuff. So keep people interested in what they love, and it's the same thing with musicians. When they're older, we get all these people that love theater, and we're so lucky in Cincinnati to have musicians that are willing to do it for barely any money. They could go out and do a band job one night and make what they make in the whole run after theater. So just remind, try to make them happy, keep them there. I feed them snacks. That's what I do. Down underneath that, it says music director, other duties. Hiring musicians and subs is important. Talking with the producers about how do the musicians get paid. I've had days where it's the closing day and I don't have checks for the band. And it's really often I've had to pay out of my own money and get reimbursed later. And a lot of times small theaters don't think about this because they might not do musicals all the time. So as a music director, I should be on top of that, talking to them way ahead. And if there's going to be a sub, does the musician that's leaving for one night, do they pay them or does the theater pay them? Finding all those things out ahead. It's really good to have, if your board has set things on that. Some of the theaters do. They already have that in writing, and so it's not always up in the air. Talk to producer about music stands. Does the theater have stands? Do they have lights? A lot of them don't. I end up buying all my own, put them in my car, lug them everywhere I go. So I love when I get to a theater and they have stands, or if they have even extension cords, because I bring a lot of that. Another job of the music director is collecting all the music at the end, make sure it's erased, to send back. Oh, the other one was, find out if the theater has a keyboard or a piano. Because some do, some don't. A lot of keyboardists want to bring their own because they like their own sounds, and that's great. But I know other ones where there's somebody who won't play unless the theater has a keyboard. He won't bring his own. So you got to find all these things out a little ahead of time if you can. Communicating with the director and choreographer is probably the biggest thing, about the calendar, how many times do you want to run with the band. A lot of theaters are not going to pay the band for rehearsals, so there's usually not that many rehearsals. Sometimes they don't have their own space, so there's nowhere to rehearse the band, and they just come in tech week. So it just really depends. Each theater's different. And where is the band, and you talk to the director and choreographer about the calendar. If you're gonna have a sitz probe, that's where you sing with the orchestra one night before you put it up on its feet, right? You can go over music problems and just singing with the band, because it takes a step back when you add the band. Mm-hmm. It's great with just piano, they get used to that, and then when you add these other instruments, it doesn't sound right, you know, or they're like, it doesn't sound like the CD. Well, no, we're not getting $500 a night either. But also, because the Broadway album has 30 players on it, and they went in a studio one day and paid these people a lot to have this great sound, you know, they send us 12 books, but we can only fit 6 musicians. That's why it's not going to sound like the Broadway album. And another thing, well, I'll get you in 1 second. I'll do that next. Location of the band, that's a big thing. Where's the band gonna be? You talk to your set designer, your director, because sometimes, like I said, you might be backstage. You might be lucky enough to have a pit and be in front. You might be on the side. And it's all gonna affect your sound. A lot of you that do sound set design too know these kind of things. Are they gonna be up? You know, where are they on the stage? And how much room am I gonna have? You always think you have more room than you do until you start putting amps and music stands. Just a review, and then one guy had like 4 or 5 instruments. That's another thing in these books, and they send you. You used to have like a flute book, you know, or a clarinet book. Now you get a reed book that has somebody who's to play 4 or 5 instruments. And that person that you get might not play all 4 of those instruments or not. So they have to do, this is probably a thing a lot of you never thought of, but they have to transpose a whole part of a book to fit their instrument, change the keys, and it's a lot of work. So they do a lot more than just come and play just the night of your show. A lot of these musicians, they have to transpose music, and if they have to have all this space for 4 instruments, you know, if I was gonna say, you know, you can put 3 instruments there. Well, by the time you have amps and music stands and lights, all that, you don't usually have as much room as you think. Communicating with the director and choreographer about the tempos of songs and dances is really, really important, because sometimes they want it just like the CD speed because they're going to rehearse, but then I understand it totally makes it easier for rehearsal. But when you start making cuts, and then I write there underscore music, that's going over the music under dialogue. How much do you need? And you're trying to get this as early as you can so you can tell your musicians and make the cuts. Cuts and vamps under dialogue are really important. But the speed of the songs and with the choreographer is really important. And cuts. I love cuts as much as anybody because I love to make it shorter. You know? I don't like an hour and a half second act or something. You know? So cuts are great, but nobody really thinks about it, and it never catches up with everything until like tech week. You think you're on top of it, but say you have a song and you dance. Where you have a 7-minute dance on a CD and you want it to be 2, 3, right? Because you don't have the dancers, you don't have the space, whatever. So they love this section of the song and then this section and maybe this section, but they don't like these 2. And that's great because the sections are different, they fit for the choreography. But when I play piano, I'm like, oh yeah, I can jump here to here. I'll just make these 2 pages and I'll tell the band. You don't realize it until you get the band, and unless a musician's smart enough to email me and tell you, but you know, this section might be for the reed flute, this might be flute, and then there might be 15 measures where they've written it out to switch the instrument to get to this section. Now you've cut this section, how do they go from flute to clarinet with no break? So they're like all flustered going, do you want me to lay out, or do you want me to transpose this section into this instrument so I don't have to change it? And so I'm just saying lay out, jump back in when you can, because it makes it really hard on them, because they really do want to do great, and they're so worried about switching instruments. So when people say, oh, I thought there was supposed to be a trumpet there, I'm like, well, they can't pick this instrument up, they transpose it to this instrument. So we try our best to make it sound like the CD, but it doesn't always.
Linda, what's a vamp?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Vamp is where you have a measure of music, or two measures, whatever, and it repeats over and over while somebody's talking or doing some other business. And then you go on when you get a cue to go on, like a certain line or dance. I'm so sorry, yeah.
No, that's good.
It's a repeat in the music. And it's easy to add those for, directors sometimes go, how many, I have 12 beats, I have to get they have to time this dialogue. I said, no, don't worry about it. We can keep repeating until you're ready. So if you, as the director, if you talk to the music director, there's tons of ways to make it work. Rehearsals with the band, again, I said, you want to talk to your director, producers, how many times you can have that space available. Vocal director, other duties, cuts and songs, you go over that with the director too, because sometimes, I just did a show this year where the lyrics were different on the CD than in the score. So I always say, which ones do you want? Which ones make sense for your story, your vision? So, and make sure the choreographer, everybody's on the same page, because the choreographer's using these lyrics to choreograph to, and the director and the choreographer both were saying different things. So you gotta try to get a final say in that. Any lyric changes, and assigning solos. Some shows, it will be, this character sings this song, that's great. Other ones where it's a review and they can move songs around, and you've got to assign songs by the voice part. So you want to go over that kind of thing with the director, or little solos in songs. It'll be like a chorus member supposed to say this line or that one. So going over that with the director ahead of time helps things go smooth in rehearsal. One thing I do want to say, it's not on here, but other options, a lot of theaters use tracks for their musicals. There's different ways to do that, and I can see the advantage of that, right? It can be cheaper. It's always the same for the actor, the dancers. They know that music inside out. You can give them, I was going to say CD, I'm so old. You can send it to them, whatever. But tracks are great. They're not great when an actor messes up and sings the wrong verse, and they jumped. And in a musical, you can try to jump with them. If I'm playing, especially if I'm playing the piano, I can jump with them. But so tracks can be hard. They're easy to get off with, because sometimes if people aren't good with them, they think they're behind and they rush, and then they get ahead of it. And they don't know if they're ahead or behind, and especially if sometimes there's vanish written in those. And you do have to go over those and cuts. And there's a lot of them now that you can get through the company. When you get the rights, you can pay for the tracks, or you can have someone do it. When I lived in Los Angeles, a lot of theaters ran 6 weeks shows. Wow. So it was hard to pay musicians and find musicians who wanted to do 6 weeks. So and there's a theater on every corner out there. So they're small. They're really small. A lot of small theaters. So what we would do is we would hire like the Santa Monica Civic Orchestra for one day, and we went to a recording studio and recorded the score. And we had already worked out how many repeats we needed, cuts and dances. So they got paid. It was the orchestra. The money went to the orchestra, not to each musician, really. But they would get paid equivalent what it would have been to pay musicians live for like a couple weeks. And we had a full orchestra sound. And it was that way you could afford it for 6 weeks. And they do their runs longer because there's so many people. They sell out all the time, and why do another show if you've already got your costumes and your sets, and go ahead and run for 6 weeks. Another way, we did it at Footliners one time because I was going to have to miss a show and the drummer was going to have to miss a show, but they were the same show. So to have a piano and drum subs, it was going to be scary. So we took the money for the run for the orchestra. We went to a recording studio. We knew we had this much money, and that would pay for, say, 6 hours in the studio plus the time for the man who mixes it, which is a lot of time. So we knew we could do that. And so for that one run, we recorded it but it was still our musicians. It wasn't like we bought the track. And a lot of shows now you can get tracks, but it's kind of nice. It kind of still felt like live musicians, because you could hear mistakes. I mean, I could. Every time there was this one mistake, I would cough really loud. Because it was that little bass part going into, these boots are made for walking. That bass part going down, I'm like, oh. And I had missed one night, and I told my brother, he was doing sound, I said, cough really loud. Maybe years. I'll do it. So then on the back, I wrote a few things that are like critiques, when you're critiquing shows, things you might look for. For the vocal director, does the ensemble blend? Are they balanced? You don't want one person who's sticking out all the time unless it's a solo. Harmonies, if you know the show, are the harmonies there, or do they have to cut a lot? Or, I'd rather hear cut harmonies and just two part or one part really strong versus people trying to do four part and it's kind of ugly. People don't get it. So I'd rather have it sound really good and strong. And if there's too much harmony where it's hard for people, you can see it on their face. They're concentrating, they're not acting, and they're not dancing well because they're too worried about their harmony. So I just try to, if it's not working, make it easier. The biggest thing for me, can you understand the words? Articulation. There's nothing like going to a show and you don't know what they're saying. You just turn it off and you start thinking about your grocery list and stuff. So that's a really big thing with me. I want to understand the words. Intonation, if you think they're flat or sharp, if you're not a musician, you might not know if it's flat or sharp, but you just know it doesn't sound in tune. You could just write, doesn't sound in tune all the time. Clean cutoffs. That's not hard. They should be able to do that. So if you hear, whole group cut off and you got one person do a little solo at the end, that's not pretty. So those are kind of easy things to listen for. Vocal levels, not pushing too hard. That just bothers me when people are starting to scream on stage. You got a mic, and I don't know, it just makes my throat hurt when people start screaming. So there's a fine point between belting. People that know how to belt right, it doesn't hurt you. It doesn't make you feel like, But people that know how to belt certain times, and then they know how to be quiet other times. That's what pulls you in, is the quiet. Just like in any theater, when you whisper, that's when the audience is like really into it. When you're screaming at them all the time and loud, it's not good anymore. Save it for certain moments. Be loud in the show, but not the whole time.
Question?
Yes. Oh, over here, yes.
Linda, so some of these things, if for an adjudicator, how would you know if it's a vocal director?
I know.
Okay,
Yes.
or the sound
Oh, the
person?
sound, the sound. So some of these things that are vocal director too also would be for the actor. One actor might be pushing, not your whole group, And yours was about the sound person. I'm so glad you have it on my little post-it. Sound person is like your best friend. You have to really work with them because some of them push it too much, and you can tell the mics are too high, and they're going to go any minute. They're going to get feedback. They're riding that line a little too much. And I really rely on my sound person to also tell me about the balance of the band, because if I'm with the band, I can't hear how loud the band is. And if the sound person, if you're lucky enough to have a sound person who gives you a monitor, which you need, sometimes they put those monitors too high. They think they're helping you, but what happens is the band plays louder because they think, they can hear that. They can hear the singer, so we're going to play out. So there's a fine line where they got to give you enough sound to hear when the band's playing, because if they check it and the band's not playing, they're like, is that monitor on? I'm like, it's on, but when the band plays, I can't hear it. But it has to be turned up a little bit, but not too much. And sound people, you feel bad for them. They're trying to mix over this orchestra. But most of them that I've worked with are really good at it, and you really do rely on them. But if you start hearing things, for me, if I start hearing something starting feedback, I try to pull the orchestra back as much as I can, because I'd rather have an orchestra too soft, because if it's too loud, it just messes everything up, because you can't hear the singers, they're screaming, you can't hear dialogue. And so that's another reason I feel like go with less musicians than, what we did. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. The music director, working on tempo, and the vocal director does this too with the director, checks, is this good? But usually you'll work on a song with an actor, and you can get the feel of the tempo they want. They don't sing it like the CD. It's not as they need to slow it down, or they want to speed it up. It's not gonna always be those tempos, but going over, especially for dance numbers with the choreographer. Is there balance between the instruments? When you're listening, in a band, you're like, is somebody sticking out too much all the time? It's not like, oh, here's a trumpet solo when we want to hear them. But sometimes, I hate to pick on trumpets again, I gotta stop. I know, it's easy. It's hard for them to play stop, I know. Balance between instruments and the balance between the orchestra and the singers. And I think that's what, when you're adjudicating, you probably notice the most, is the band too loud for the singers. Balance during underscoring, that is during dialogue. That's a big thing. It just I think the band should always just pull way back, not covering up you shouldn't even really know they're playing, if that makes sense. It just should be kind of quiet in the background. And then, it's usually written where, when someone sings, the music's not real loud until they're holding a note, or in between their phrases when they're breathing, then usually it's written, that's where the little solos are in the music and stuff. So it usually works out, but, once in a while, you do get an instrument that somebody that just wants to play really loud. We'll send you a check for $20 maybe. You do. Does anybody else have other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I do. The whole thing about the music director and the balancing,
Yes.
okay? I have noticed, I don't judge a lot of musicals because of this thing. There is, again, a trumpet player that when I first saw him in this show, and it seemed like the higher he got, the louder he got. And I thought, has the director not pulled him down? And so it was a director thing,
Yeah.
right? So he's played a lot of different companies, and I have come to recognize him. And when he's playing, it always happens. It doesn't matter who the director is. So how do you deal with that?
Well,
when you're
a music director or critiquing, you can sing aloud. I wouldn't say, you don't say the name, but just say the trumpet was sticking out. I mean, they're gonna read that, they're gonna see it. It really is, a lot of trumpet players, it's hard for them to play soft, I understand that. I would say, put your mute in or whatever, you just can't be doing that all the time. But there are a few that I know you are. But you can put it as balance to the music director, put it in that critique or the overall orchestra. There is a thing where you can put that orchestra performance.
Yeah.
And you could just say there was an instrument that was sticking out, and they'll know who it is.
Yeah, it always does, and so, when you're finding out something, you're going,
Yeah, there's
this
couple that I know. I'm like the whole time.
everything.
And there's some that are great players that can pull back, but it is hard on those high notes for them. Again, a reason why, if it calls for 2 trumpets, don't get 2 trumpets. Get one and take parts out of book 1 and book 2, which parts you want, and copy and paste this, so they play the important parts, you leave other things out. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of listening to the score and knowing what the feel is. Like, if it's a show that's kind of jazzy, we really need more saxophone in this show. And we can let other things go. It's like I said, it's not gonna be like the CD, but it's gonna work for the theater. Most of the theaters, we're so lucky in Cincinnati and North Carolina to have so many theaters, but most of them are not rooms built acoustically for these instruments. If you put 2 trumpets in here, So, that kind of stuff. You just gotta, every theater's different, every space is different, and so it's hard to say, it's not the same rules for every single place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So another instance is where are they playing? Like I said, that one time I was playing a trumpet up there, wasn't the best. In the back, you could. If you were backstage, we did that one time for the first Jesus Christ Superstar. It was great because we were underneath and hidden, and you could have more instruments. We had 3 electric guitars. It was so loud back there, but it was great for the audience. So every space is different.
And just to follow through just a little bit more on that, because the balance then between the orchestra and
And
the singers, then you could listen and you know that they're pumped as loud as they can be. So now it becomes
A balance between
for
both.
the director then to bring it down. Right?
Yeah, the director should come and say, we can't hear the singers. You know, maybe you can't, you're backstage and you have a monitor, maybe you can, but it's overpowering. So then it does become them too, they need to make a decision too.
Okay.
To tell you, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just one person's problem, I guess.
So a big part of being a responder is trying to understand the given circumstances of the space versus the folks who are doing their best. Would you break down like a couple spaces in town that we respond to and the given circumstances that, hey, this is the challenge of this space? And when you're writing your response, that might be something to keep in mind.
That's true, yeah.
Given circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I can always, if anyone ever wants to email me or call me or text me, I'd be glad to help you, if you have music questions. Things like this, small buildings, you don't wanna overpower anybody. So when you're looking, in your critiques, you can even say, I think the band was too much for that building. I think you had too many instruments for where sometimes I've been in a place where, say they put the instruments over here on the side. It's right next to the audience.
Yeah.
And so the audience is hearing the band, even though they're not too loud for the singers to hear, they're hearing the band. I went to a show, I think it was at Dunham, and it was like, the band was huge, it was great, but there were like 3 keyboards and a trumpet, and I was right next to them. So that's all I heard, and the actors were doing a great job, but it wasn't their fault, and it wasn't even the sound guy's fault. Do you know what I mean? It was just too many instruments for the space. So I think that you can critique it by saying something like that. It's not like you're not against any one instrument or how they're playing. It's just, if you mention the space, I think that would help a lot. I've been in the front, like at Loveland before, and it's great, but sometimes you're right by the audience might get that before they get this, the actors. Footlighters is great, but you got a delay when you're on that back. And that's really hard when you're up in the choir loft and back. There's this weird echo. I don't know. You can stand down in the seats and you're up there and you can hear everything this person says. It's weird. They don't know you can hear them. It's this echo thing off the wall. It's really weird. And so there's things like that in a lot of buildings. And you don't always know it, and you don't know what instrument's gonna bounce too. So like in footlighters, you do a lot of things where you push the trumpets sideways or playing into this wall instead of out. Because they know how loud they are, and they know you can do that. So there's a lot, every theater, like, you have to take that into consideration. And when you're judging, you don't always think of that. You think of, well, this band's just too loud, It's just, and a lot of music directors, for some reason, think that they need to have every instrument. If you have a big pit and you have a great 500-seat theater, well, then that's great. But when you have, somewhere small, you gotta say, okay, we can have a reed player and a piano and a drum, and that's it. And, so I don't know if that helps. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
How do you decide, like, specifically what instruments you might need for a show?
Well, first, when you guys all probably know when you look at the website, it lists all the instruments and they send you that list. And I'm always like, well, no. Just got one that says like what? What is it called? Oh, the whole string section, cello, bass, we're not gonna find those people for $25. Oh, okay, I'll go back to this. So anyhow, you look at that list and you think, well, I know I need a rhythm section. I know I need piano, bass, drums, guitar, maybe guitar, if it's depending on what kind of show it is. And then you listen to the recording a lot, and you'll think, wow, there's a lot of clarinet. I think I need a reed, or that trumpet, that has to be in there. So you kind of pick and choose, and it's all by ear, by looking at the score. Oh, the other thing, when you cast a show, try to make sure that you have a score ahead of time, like a perusal score if you can. You can find them online a lot now. And if I have to do that, then I just look through to find for each character, what's the highest note they have to sing, or the lowest note. or I've done it off the recording too. YouTube helps a lot. But if you just need that at your audition, because sometimes you'll think, and even if you don't know the exact note, at least you know it's a high tenor, or we need a bass. Because if you don't know that, and a director's like, oh, I love this person, they're such a great actor, and I'm like, but they can't go up. They need 5 more notes on that range to sing that song, you know. And I have transposed songs, but then you got to transpose for the whole day, and it's not, yeah, it's not fun. So I just pick and choose by listening. And what was the other thing right before that we were talking about? Instruments. Oh, I was going to tell you something about picking instruments, but I don't know. So it's hard to say. I hate to say it's not definitive, but it's not like you're playing Broadway. I hate to say it. You're not going to have every instrument. It's not going to sound exactly the same, but you make it sound the best it can for your theater. And you know, every theater, sometimes they change it up. They're like, you know, you can be out here for this show. What would you do? And then another show, you're gonna be behind the set. And you can sometimes you get more instruments when you're behind, believe it or not, because you might have the whole backstage area. So, and you might be able to have a trumpet because they're covered up. You got a whole set in front of them. Anybody else? Yes.
So this is kind of like a billing question, I guess, for like in the program. So the show we're doing currently, our vocal director is, we can do tracks, but he wanted a very specific sound. So he recorded our tracks himself, like played every instrument, recorded every instrument.
He tracked it, yeah.
So how would you like build that? Would you still just build that as like music director or like?
You can put music director, you can put tracks by.
Okay.
Yeah, I would do that because that is so much work. My brother did that for me for a couple shows.
Yeah.
And it's a lot, but it's nice because you can get what you want. You can get the sound you want versus buying the tracks, the generic ones. And music director, are they doing the vocals too?
They vocal
do
directed
everything,
yeah.
You know, and if you're in a larger area, like if you're in New York or something, they have other music jobs, like a music supervisor, who will do all that. They might not be at the show, but they're gonna get your music director, your conductor. You know, some music directors conduct the show, some don't, but most do, either conducting or from the piano. I play the piano. Believe it or not, you feel more in charge when you're playing the piano because you can speed the tempo up. Sometimes I can't pull a band and I'm trying so hard and they come can't play it. Come on. But if they hear you play it, they stay with you. So sometimes they do a lot of jobs like that. So you can list them all. You can list a generic music director, but I prefer to, you want to be recognized for all the different things that you do. And, some theaters are great. I hate to even bring up money, but some are great because they pay you for each job. And I can't tell you how appreciative you are when they recognize that you do all 3 different things. Some just go, here, and you're like, what is this for? Is this music directing? Is this vocal directing? So if you do have different people, you do expect to pay them. And like I say, some of these theaters are wonderful. They have how much the choreographer, how much a music director, and the other ones don't pay anything, and that's fine too, because we know that going in, and you tell your musicians ahead of time, that's a good one. Because I paid some out of my own money, because I felt bad. And more snacks. So, anybody else have questions? Yes.
Here we go again, and again, I apologize to all of you who do music. I don't know the ins and outs of musicals, I really don't. Not that I couldn't do one, but I'm not gonna compete with all these young people. All right, you were talking about how you could cut this out of the music and stuff. Does the license holder give you that right to begin with?
Not
Or are you
really,
doing
no.
free?
But we, I wouldn't cut a song. I wouldn't cut a whole number. I wouldn't add a number. But within a dance break or something where you just don't have those people, I think that it's okay. When you do tracks, they do offer that. You can say, I want these measures cut, and they put it in there, so it's okay.
I
Yeah,
wondered,
yeah.
because I don't.
But I did a show on Showboat where it was tracked. In the old version, there was a song. The new score, the song wasn't in there. But when we got the tracks, it was, and the director said, I love that song, we gotta leave it in. I said, okay, I taught it even though we didn't have it in the score. We got a cease and desist from Stephen Schwartz because there was somebody watching, yes, and a song had been added. And he said he doesn't want that in until we're gonna do a revival, so take that song out. But at the same time, we had taken this goofy chorus number out, and we quickly put it back in. They were watching, like 2 days before we opened. Yeah, so I don't like to cut or add whole numbers, because
I was curious.
you know, you never know who's watching. I think you remember Beef and Boys?
Sure.
Yeah.
They were doing Annie. This is probably back in the 70s, 80s, I guess. And they cut part of NYC Dance, and they got caught, and they actually had to close. They didn't even give them the option, okay? And they had musicians for the show for 6 weeks under contract. They had to pay all those musicians, even though they didn't get to do the show. So, yeah, it's scary. It's scary. But I think in dance, in sections like that, or, you know, we're cutting 4 measures because the dialogue doesn't take as long as we thought. I think that it's okay. Don't say I said that.
So, Linda, you talked a little bit about this before, and I sometimes struggle with this as a responder, so it's for you as well as everybody else. So we may see a show, I'm gonna use the example Hunchback, for example. Quasi is normally played by a very strong tenor. And because if we had one community theater in Cincinnati, you'd probably have 20 people auditioning, you have your biggest
Too many.
But since we have 24 community theaters, you know, you don't think you get it. So we've seen sometimes, or so I've seen sometimes where you see someone and their voice part is clearly wrong for the role. And they struggle mightily through the show. Is that something we can articulate in our response?
I think you can. I mean, they know they're not singing the role, but I don't know if I would say it too personally to that performer, because they're doing what they were, I mean, they hired them, they picked them. Hopefully they change the notes instead of making it sound like they're struggling. Like, I would change high notes, I would find variations of notes for them to sing, hopefully, so they can still be strong, but they're not screaming. But I have worked with directors who go, they can hit it, and they're like, what? And I'm like, no, they can't. And then they get self-conscious about it. I worked with somebody who, I was just playing the piano and somebody was a vocal director, and she kept saying, you're flat, and it's like, that person just like never would sing out again. They were, instead of being kind and doing it away from everybody else, or one-on-one, and doing it nicely, it freaked them out, and they would never sing, you know, and they were struggling the whole rest of the performances. So with something like that, I think I would write, I would say more of a generic, like, that should be a tenor role, like, the person is not a tenor or something, they did a good job with what they could, you know, I would say it nice, try to say it in a nice way.
Would it go back to the music director?
For them casting that person,
Or
Yeah.
working with?
working with, well, if it's clearly out of the range, they've probably done as much as they could. If you hire a baritone for a tenor role, and, you know, that goes back to the director and the music director, I think. I really do. So I wouldn't, now, clearly, if it's somebody who could sing it, but they were all of a sudden screaming instead of singing, I would put that more on the actor, you know what I mean? Trying to belt where they shouldn't.
I'm sorry, could changing the octaves also be
Yeah.
trouble?
Oh, yeah. You can change octaves, but I wouldn't, most songs that are going out with somebody like big ending or something, I would probably just change a couple notes. Somewhere I just did, somebody got sick in a show and they couldn't hit the high note, the last performance or something. So we just altered the note, they stayed here, if you know it, instead of going up, they just stayed on the same note. And most of the audience would know it. I mean, people that know that song really well, but they're not gonna be offended. I'd rather hear somebody do something strong in a better range than trying to reach for something. Because that it just hurts me to hear that.
A note on adjudicating this thing and how to write it up. I've been on the receiving end of that critique before, actually was here when I did bingo. The range for the role was astounding. I mean, I'm a pretty strong singer and I have a really big range. There were some bottom notes that,
low, yeah.
and low is really hard to build yourself into. So some of it is like knowing what that's like. Building yourself into higher notes is a lot easier than building yourself into lower notes. And, we did everything we could and, and I spoke some lines to get around it and did all that sort of thing. All three of the adjudicators mentioned it, which it was fine. Two of them mentioned it really well. One of them, if that had been all I had ever heard, I might have called into a ball and never performed again. But the ones who commented on it well, what they would say is, these parts are written for professional singers. And none of us are that.
Or the one singer who can do that.
So,
that they found.
or written specifically for a person, or, whatever. And so, recognizing that, recognizing, oh, I saw you doing these things to get around the notes that were out of your range. Those comments were very helpful. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I didn't completely get away with it, but they saw, what I was doing, and then at the same time saying, and in these spots, bam, you knocked my socks off.
Right.
And but like balancing
I
those
totally
comments that way
If you
makes you not
if you
feel
say
involved
something
and die.
in a nice way, I think if it just general in life, I think if you say something nice, you can go back and say the negative in a nice way, and people aren't gonna, if you just pound the negative, and I know that's easier to do because you're in a hurry, you're writing something, and you're like, this was wrong, this could have been better, find the good as well as the bad, and people will take it so much better. When I go to somebody who's singing, I say, you're doing this great, but maybe we can fix this. Then they take it. If I just walk in and say, this note's flat, you're not hitting that. Like, again, they get self-conscious, they get defensive, and they might not ever do a good job again for you because it's just human nature. Like that person I said when I was doing a show one time at Lighters, and this person was screaming at this poor actor, and he wasn't even a singer, and in front of everybody. And I just felt so bad. And another instance was at a high school where a director's in front of everybody, she kept saying, try this note, sing this. And he was like, you could just feel the tension. And I'm like, let me work with him by himself, and he might be able to get it. And if he can't, I'll change the note. But to do that to a poor high school kid who is self-conscious to begin with, and he's lucky that he came out, we're lucky he came out for a show, a boy at that age. Don't make him self-conscious. And so you can really hurt people's feelings, like, you've been singing forever, but a judge, if they don't say it in a nice way, it still can hurt your feelings, And so you want people to keep doing theater. I mean, overall, you want to be a great critique, but think of people as humans and more than just you doing your job. Because, as your job, you do have to find things that can make it better and make the performance better. But like a lot of times, you don't know what has gone on before. You don't know that theater that they were told they have to use all these instruments. We want to use the full score, and you're saying it's loud. You don't know who suggested this, was it the producers? And you're just following directions sometimes. So if I would say on any of these, even if you don't know a lot about music, what sounds good to you. And if you know what doesn't. And you might not know, oh, that's flat, or they're singing in the wrong octave, or you can find ways to say, I think it sounded really good. I think it was balanced. You did a good job with that. I can tell you were trying. You were having fun up there.
Well, you can say, in a critique, you can say things like, I saw you doing this at these moments.
So there's ways to do it without, totally shattering someone, yes.
What about vocal strain? If you notice an actor is just.
You can say, I feel like you were pushing too hard, you can say that. Because they're straining for notes, or again, it's like the trumpet, they're trying to be too loud to get that note instead of backing off with it, And you can say stuff like that. That's not gonna really, I don't think that will hurt anybody's feelings. They know that they are. And they've probably been told by the music director too. They don't listen, what I mean? Yeah.
Do you want to take just a few words?
Oh, yeah, anybody else?
Good.
Have you ever, experienced a situation where, a director who knows nothing about with the music that's involved or whatever, where they love the show, they love the music, and when you're in the audition process, they love the acting, but not the singing and vice versa?
Yes.
Is it a musical director's, is it usually the singer that wins or the actor that wins?
It depends on the show.
Okay.
Some shows, some, like maybe it's a review, and the singing is what's gonna win out. Okay, but if it's, an acting show, I would always say to the director, I can work with them, they're not my first choice, but, just know they're not gonna sound as good as this person, but they do act it better. So luckily, I've really taken the acting in a musical, but say it's somebody who has to come in and they sing the one number, it's a big belt number. They have one number in the show, and you want that to be the best it can be. Then I would really fight for the singer, because there only maybe one scene. And I'm like, can you bring the acting up? His voice is amazing. But if it's a big lead, I'm gonna fight for, the singer. But if they can't act at all, why do the show? I'm sorry that I feel the same. But I do let the director know that they're not the best singer for the part, but I can see why they would pick them, and I would work with them to make them the best. Yeah, and some again, it's the show. Some shows the acting's more important. I don't want to say more important, but it's more of an acting show, acting piece, and some are just fluff and the vocals, and then you have people that can sing harmony. I mean, there's some shows like it's a review and it's 4 people have to be able to do the harmony. Otherwise, I've done it where I had to switch parts around the whole show and give one lady the melody the whole time. And so, usually you might sing the soprano line the whole show. But I had to go, oh, you sing soprano in this line, in this song you sing alto, and everybody else had to remember where they sing because this one person couldn't harmony. So that's not fun. So it's both acting and singing, and I think it depends on the show. Anybody else?
We appreciate.
Thank you.